Okay. Good afternoon to everyone. My name is Renato Lombardi. I am responsible of the research center of Huawei in Italy, mostly focused on wireless hardware technology, especially high frequency. And I've been in the business in the field of microwave millimeter wave for nearly 30 years. I'm here presenting these slides on behalf of ETSI ISG microwave millimeter wave. Next slide, please. So ISG in ETSI, so European Telecommunication Standards Institute. ISG stands for Industry Specification Group. It is a group that I'm chairing, and we started around 6 years ago. As you can see, groups together the most important vendors for microwave, millimeter wave, important operators, antenna, semiconductors. Somehow we want to have the whole value chain for microwave millimeter wave used for transmission. So MWT stands for millimeter wave transmission. Here highlighted in red because then in the panel, I will introduce them later. We have also two gentlemen from Nokia and NEC that we work together in this group of ETSI. Next slide, please. So first of all is to realize the importance of wireless backhaul in mobile networks. Notwithstanding, we hear very often that 4G first and 5G especially will need fiber to each antenna. We know as a factor that wireless backhaul is more than 70% of the connections to the base stations with a very strong geographical difference. So we see, for instance, that China, Japan, South Korea is definitely low, while we see in other regions of the world, you can see in the map here in the slide, the importance in terms of percentage of connections that are carried out with microwave millimeter wave backhaul. And overall, we have more than 4 million links in operations worldwide. Next slide. The spectrum that we are using is quite varies a lot. So we have in the blue what we call traditional bands from 6 to 42 gigahertz, and we have also the E-band 71, 86. We will see also what we are doing in the W-band and D-band, so the frequency, so the spectrum above 90 gigahertz, in which we are also focusing some of the research and innovation. Of course, when we look at the geographical usage of spectrum, we see very big differences according to one of the atmospheric phenomenon that affects microwave most, that is rain attenuation. So we have, for instance, in the tropical range, very strong use of 15, 18, 23 gigahertz, while, for instance, in Europe, in the last years, we have been moving also due to the other bands very crowded to higher frequencies, especially 23, 38 gigahertz, and E-band that is really increasing very fast. Next slide. When we go to 5G deployment and the requirements to the backhaul, I think that we are all aware of the famous now picture with the 5G KPI that are then translated in the most important impact on the wireless backhaul. For sure, the most important one is capacity, and we will see through the presentation and with the panel how we will face and solve the issue of transmitting much higher capacity. Of course, we have latency, we have the link density, we have synchronization, and other impacts that are more on the networking side. So advanced packet networking, especially in terms of quality of service and all what is needed in order also to support slicing of 5G. And then, of course, the wireless backhaul as a part of a network in terms of SDN. Next slide, please. So when in ISG, we decided in a very systematic way to analyze all the requirements of 5G and then show how microwave millimeter wave can cope well with these requirements and what we have to do or what we are already doing in the technology in order to make possible the usage of wireless backhaul for 5G. We started by identifying the different type of sites, and according to the different type of site, we will see what is the capacity and what is the op lamps that is needed in order to meet the requirements. So we move from dense urban down to rural with some flavors, because country by country, what can be suburban is seen as a semi-rural or vice versa. What is important is to see that not all sites are the same and not all the sites will be served with the same type of solution. Next slide, please. So in particular, when we see in the network from rural to dense urban, is not only a matter of capacity. So of course, rural in which the coverage is more important than the super high capacity. We see in initial and mature phase capacities ranging from 1 to 2 gigabits, and then steadily growing when we move to urban up to the 5, 10 gigabits in the two different phases. Of course, the difference also between rural and urban is in terms of op lamps, so from distances above 5, 7 kilometers in rural, urban that are in the range of 2, 3 kilometers, and suburban that is in the middle. Another important thing is to see how the sites are distributed according to the categories, and we see that nearly 40% of the sites worldwide are in the rural, and you can see the percentages for the others. And also quite important to see is that while we have for sure a certain relatively richness of fiber in the urban areas, the wireless backhaul definitely dominates in rural and suburban, and probably will remain like this because most of the cases, most of the networks, not all the sites are equally profitable, and especially the rural sites, suburban sites, are not so profitable. So the return on investments by deploying fiber to those sites is definitely much, much longer than in the city. According to the op lamps, according to the capacity in different categories, we may have different solutions for wireless backhaul. So for sure, for the longer distances, we use traditional microwave. For urban, we see how E-band, so the 80 gigahertz, is becoming more and more important, and in the future we can have frequency bands like a W band, D band, so about 90 gigahertz, while in the suburban, so in the op lamps range around 5 to 7 kilometers, we are now proposing with a band and carrier aggregation E-band plus traditional micro. So to have on the same antenna two transceivers, one at E-band 80 gigahertz to give the boost of capacity, while the off-length, so the number of nines that we need for the most important part of the capacity given by using 15 to 23 gigahertz. Next slide. So in particular, what we see worldwide in terms of evolution of the wireless backhaul, we see gradual, actually a relatively fast transformation of the network in which we don't have anymore the long chains from the point of presence of fiber. So more fiber in the networks, so more points of presence of fiber means topologies that are what we call a star topology. So hub and spike to the tail site. And we have seen that the average number of links from the hub to the tail site has been reducing very fast. So just if something in between 1 and 2. So that's why we call shorter networks, shorter hops because of the densification of the sites, shorter network because we have only on average a little bit more than one link from fiber to the tail site. And this is also quite good also for the latency because we have only one microwave or millimeter wave hop from fiber to the tail site. And this is also a way we can cope by with the increase of capacity. In particular, what we see is, at least as a trend worldwide, here we have some examples with the Middle East or an important customer with a global presence in Europe and Africa, with the distribution of the off-lamps, so that nearly 70% of the links for instance, in those regions can be covered either with E-band or with E-band associated with traditional microwave. And also what we have seen in the last 4 or 5 years that E-band or band aggregation E-band has been steadily growing in terms of deployments at a rate of 40% year over year. Next slide, please. What is also important is that finally the importance of microwave for the backhaul, and then also how to most efficiently regulate spectrum with regulations and more proper licensing has been also recognized by a very important institution. The first one is CPT. So CPT stands for the Conference European Post and Telecommunications. So say the group that regulate the spectrum usage in Europe. Next slide. And also quite important, also GSMA. So I don't need to introduce GSMA. So let me say the Association of the Mobile Operator realized the importance of microwave or wireless backhaul and the necessity to do something in order to have spectrum more efficiently regulated and to make spectrum licensing more suitable to the necessity of the operators to increase capacity and requiring more spectrum. So GSMA set up 6 months ago the backhaul task force and putting together vendors, but especially operators from all over the world in order to come to discuss which are the most or the highest priority topics related to spectrum that should be tackled in order to make it more efficiently used. Next slide. Here, without you will have the slides, so you will be able to read the details. So in this spectrum initiative by GSMA, we have to look at what is the spectrum that is used, what is the cost of the spectrum, the impact of the spectrum cost on the total cost of ownership, what are the requirements, and how the spectrum should evolve in order to cope with the requirements coming from 5G, and what type of regulations licensing will be most suitable in order to permit operators to deploy properly 5G. With the strong consideration, realization that 5G deployment cannot be done without proper use of the wireless backhaul. Next slide. So we have seen we see in this graph that with the introduction of the different new technologies for the radio access network, how the capacity is increasing, not only, of course, in the capacity in the access, but immediately as a follow-up in the capacity that we have to backhaul from the base stations. And what we see up to now is that basically the cost of spectrum for operator, the cost of backhaul spectrum for operator is growing linearly with the increase of capacity. So somehow we have to find ways to regulate and license spectrum in a way to break this linear growth of spectrum cost. Next slide. So around the world, or also, let me say, in terms of regulations, there are the four basic licensing schemes that you see here in the table, from individual licensing link by link with the coordination that is responsibility by the administration, that is the most used. It's also preferred by mobile network operators because of the guarantee to have under control interference, but of course this is the most expensive one. We have the light licensing, in which the application is still link by link, but the coordination is under responsibility of the operator itself, and by a proper or reliable and accurate database in which you can store the data of the link. And in some countries, E-band is regulated in this way. Then we have the block assignment, so with the public auction, most of the cases, in which operator is given a block, and then it's under the responsibility of the operator to manage the links and potential interference that is, in any case, within the same network, and operator, so with the standards for the guard band or for the out-of-band emission that is necessary to respect. Normally, this has been used in frequency bands of 26, 28, 32 gigahertz with point-to-multipoint, but in some cases, for instance, in India, even if on a channel basis, we have a sort of block assignment. And we will see also a proposal that as industry we are doing as we will see later a hybrid licensing that could be a good trade-off between block and individual licensing. What is also important here to consider in this conference, here you can see, for instance, 5 countries, 3 in Asia Pacific, 2 in Europe, with a very significant cost difference for spectrum. So first of all is the fact that countries that would need even more the use of wireless backhaul to deploy the network have a very, very high cost of spectrum. So you can see 28 megahertz at 15 gigahertz, you can see cost differences of an order of magnitude, so with a factor of 10. And unfortunately, we see that also by going up with the frequency, we don't see the cost of spectrum going down. So somehow giving the premium of using the higher portion of the spectrum that we would like to see going down more rapidly. The other thing that we are paying a lot of attention is that for backhaul, for microwave, normally the use of the second polarization requires a doubling of the fee. And this is one of the things that we are trying to fight, and we can also see some technical evidence supporting this. Next slide. What is the best way of licensing? Of course, depends on too many factors. How is used the band, if it is greenfield, brownfield, and the requirements of the operator, if it is incumbent or not incumbent. Let's go to the next slide. I will try to accelerate. So we can go from individual licensing. We will see how we have somehow to introduce different ways to improve the efficiency in spectrum usage, what we call geographical spectrum efficiency, especially important for hub and spike topologies. And we will see that especially for greenfield, but also with the current usage of spectrum, the proposal related to the hybrid licensing scheme. Next slide. So what is a hybrid? Hybrid means basically to reserve a block for the mobile operator. So, but without going to an expensive upfront payment, and give the operator in case the possibility, not the possibility, to apply on a link-by-link basis and pay on a link-by-link, but within a block that is assigned on exclusive basis to the mobile operator. This is a good compromise because with block we can definitely improve the interference management in a network, especially in star topology. And but in the meantime, not having the operator to pay upfront the long block license that would be needed for this. So this is a scheme that we are trying now to propose in the regulation bodies in order to find the best compromise. Next slide. Now, how can we improve capacity, spectral efficiency? Let me say, in order to transmit more capacity, the cheapest way is to use more spectrum. Since this is a quite scarce resource that we need to use more efficiently, we can, of course, improve the modulation schemes up to 8,000 QM, but there's a practical cap on what we can do, and especially whenever we do a step after 1024 QM, moving to, for instance, 4,000, we are just increasing the spectrum efficiency around 10-20%. So we move from 10 to 11 or 12 bits per symbol. So we are not actually making a big difference. So we need to find ways. Of course, we can use much wider channels as it is here in the picture, for instance, going at E-band 80 gigahertz, where we can use channels of 500 megahertz, 1 gigahertz, or even in some cases 2 gigahertz, so we can transmit definitely very high capacity. Next slide. Another way that we have already seen at the beginning is by using band and carrier aggregation, so BCA, in which we are either transmitting with carrier aggregation in band 2 or more channels in the same frequency band, but even more useful in order to cover long distances and very high capacity is to use, for instance, 80 gigahertz for the very high capacity, so we can have the 10 gigabits, and the lower band, for instance, 15 gigahertz, to have the 5 nines on the most valuable part of the traffic. And this is what we call band aggregation, so E-band plus 15 gigahertz. Next slide. Double depolarization, so this is definitely not a new technology, improved, so the cross-polar interference canceller, but what is important in the next slide, please, is that the use of the second polarization for us is geographical spectrum efficiency. So we should convince administration that is not correct to make pay the second, or to pay double for the use of the second polarization. If you see in this picture, you can immediately see that for channel 1 to use the second polarization for this can only be used by the same operator in the same area. So nobody else can use the same channel in the other polarization if there's not XPIC, so the cross-polar interference canceller, used in the link. So this means that the second polarization wouldn't be used if not by the same operator using XPIC. So that's why from a spectrum point of view, the picture on the left and the picture on the right are the same. So we don't understand why the operator should pay for the second polarization. Next slide. We are also introducing with different flavors, with more directive antennas, with interference canceller co-channel, the capability to narrow down the angle between adjacent links with a one-to-one reuse of the frequency. So once again, if you see in the same area covered by the hub and the tail sites, we are using the same amount of spectrum from F1 to F4. We can do this, but we can quadruple the capacity from the starting point thanks to the use of interference cancellers, better antennas. So we should, you understand here, to introduce not only the spectrum efficiency on a link basis, but to introduce spectrum efficiency on geographic. And this is quite useful with the evolution of the backhaul technology and the backhaul network to stars. So the possibility to manage more efficiently interference in star networks. Next slide. This is a formula that we are proposing as ETSI. Now, without entering and discussing the details, what we would like to see is a premium first, or a better premium incentive for the operators that are going to use a higher portion of the spectrum. So that's why we say that the central frequency should be square denominator. Because the denial area of the frequency reuse goes with the square of the distance. So that means that if we go from, for instance, 20 gigahertz to 80 gigahertz, we should see the central frequency 80 gigahertz square denominator. So the cost of the license go down much faster. The other thing that we are introducing is this factor 1 over n, in which this n should be 2 in case of use of XPSC, or could even be 4 if we are using interference cancellation, then can reduce the angles among the links. So somehow to incentivize the introduction of technology to improve spectrum efficiency in hubs. Next slide. Let's go also to the next one. Let's go to the conclusion. Okay, so what we are going to push for micro. So for sure the adoption of wider channels, so moving from 28 to 56 to 112 megahertz, to introduce concepts related to geographical spectrum efficiency, so no additional fees for dual polarization, incentivize the deployment of the interference mitigation cancellation, so that by using the same channel in the same area, operators can use much wider channels than today, and progressively move from individual link to some form of block licensing as the hybrid licensing we proposed before. E-band that is becoming extremely important because thanks to the very wide channels, we can go up to capacity of 10, 20 gigabits. We need to reduce licenses of the E-band with the formula we have seen before in order to incentivize operators to use it. We needed to release E-band in many countries that have not released it yet, and favored with the band aggregation the use of the E-band together with traditional micro for the longer links. And something in the longer term, also the release of the W-band and D-band that you see sketched here in the picture. So the W-band from 92 to 115 gigahertz, and the D-band from 130 to 170. Especially in the D-band, industry is investing a lot. Okay, that was the last slide. I think we can go. Okay, we finished the presentation, and here you see also the reference where you can find us in ETSI. Let me introduce now the other two gentlemen in the panel that are working together. We are working together in the ETSI ISG. So we have, at least I see him on my right upper corner, that sign, affiliated with NEC, and Paolo Di Prisco with Nokia. I leave to them a quick introduction, and then we can go to questions and answers.
Okay, maybe I can start since I'm on your right or left. This is Nader Zain from NEC, and I'm also working with Renato as his vice chair, and I'm chief engineer in NEC Europe, working mainly on the fixed services, microwave, millimeter wave equipment, specifically focusing on regulatory and standardization affairs. Thank you.
Good afternoon to everybody. So my name is Paolo Di Prisco, and I'm leading strategic evolution within Nokia for mobile network transport, which includes wireless transmission as well as the transport domain for the mobile base station.
Okay, I don't see questions from the floor, so let me start putting some questions to Paolo and Nader. So, in your experience, the deployments with NEC and Nokia, you can also confirm the percentages that we see for the wireless backhaul, and how you see still the importance of microwave backhaul in the future for 5G deployment. Nader, if you...
Okay.
Paolo.
Yeah, I mean, I can say, I can confirm actually, if we look outside US, China and Japan, microwave and millimeter wave, like the E-band and so on, is actually more than 70% of the backhaul. Front haul, we still yet to see that expanding. And in some area, it's even much higher, as you know, like in India, for example, maybe you have a better figure, but over 90% of the links are really microwave. So yeah, it is very important we see from our customer base. And so I don't know if Paolo wants to add here.
Yeah, I believe the same. I think here there is a shared consensus that fiber cannot cover, let's say, all the cases, and especially for non-tier 1 operators, microwave is fundamental to reach the cell sites. So I fully agree on this. We
have discussed many times about the requirements. Yes, thank you. We have discussed many times, and there's for sure a certain consensus on the requirements coming from 5G to the backhaul, to the wireless backhaul, and particularly the capacity. So, what do you see in the industry the most important technology directions, technology innovations in wireless backhaul to meet the 5G backhaul requirements?
Okay. Maybe I can start and Paolo can continue. Yeah, I mean, as you already indicated, Renato, in your slides, wider channel bandwidth is becoming very important as one aspect to improve the capacity. I mean, as you said, spectrum is very scarce. So one way, another aspect is going into higher frequency in the millimeter wave above 100 gigahertz and so on. As you know, we already have the W and D band introduced in Europe. We already have, as a community in the MWT, pushing for the same in the ITUR, WP5C. We already have proposal there. And of course, there's others. I mean, maybe it's not mentioned there, but there is a lot of additional efforts need to take place, like, for example, MIMO. There's some question about its practicality, but maybe it become more, those challenges maybe can ease as you go up into higher frequency in the D band and so on. Another aspect you mentioned is the geographical efficiency, especially when combined. We use the channel interference technology in that sense. That's also becoming important. So if you combine those together, beamforming we see something that is emerging. We don't have that yet, but because of the regulation and the licensing restriction, but yeah, there is a lot of efforts in that direction. Paolo, maybe you can add.
Yeah. I see in terms of technology directions, let's say there is maybe a first phase of 5G, and here E-band and carrier aggregation are really the key technologies in which the different vendors have invested to meet the needs of the enhanced mobile broadband. And really for the long term, for the mid-long term, there are these frequencies beyond 100 gigahertz that can make really the equipments very compact with beam steering, and so phase array antennas that also another mentioned, that can be really disruptive in having also a kind of mesh network with full automation, and this is really linked to densification steps, so the 5G phase 2, let's say. So there are plenty of tools in the micro and millimeter wave domains to meet this evolution and this demand.
Yeah, I see also some questions coming up. Here, of course, this is Asia Pacific. So we are even not physically, virtually in Jakarta, so in Asia Pacific, where we know in the tropical range, rain is quite important. So you see some technologies that are more suitable to Asia Pacific. And this leads also to the question that while we see E-band very strongly used in Europe, in Middle East, as industry, what we have done in order to improve the confidence by operators also in India, Indonesia, the Philippines, and so on in the region, the use of the E-band. So how to improve the confidence by operators. So, I know, Paolo, if you want to comment.
Yeah, I think that, in terms of suitable technology for this region, clearly E-band has a strong potential, and it's a pity that somewhere, let's say, this band is not yet open, or it is not yet, let's say, awarded in the right direction in terms of fees, because this is really representing an interesting potential, and as well with the other frequency bands, so in carrier aggregation. And in terms of, let's say, ETSI, ISG, millimeter wave, actually, this is the bulk of our work there, to push and to foster the usage of the spectrum for wireless backhaul. And I think something has been mentioned as well by Renato during the presentation. So in terms of different deliverables that are quite practically recommending some best practices for the usage of the E-band, and to be used as well with administrations. And this is an example in which we want to foster this adoption. And so then we gather the comments in the different communities, ITU, GSMA, and so on, in order to refine these recommendations, especially for the E-band.
Yeah, I can also add that one of the efforts we took from the beginning was to show that for E-band, the same methods used by predicting the performance of microwave in traditional bands are still very accurate also at E-band. So basically, E-band can be very well, very accurately predicted in terms of performance, in terms of availability, as we are now doing at 18 or 20 gigas. So we had also a group report in which we have shown trials carried out worldwide by different companies, different operators, showing the accuracy of prediction models that we have in IQR and that are used to make the network planning. This is also now leading. We have another questions from Hutchinson. About 5G millimeter wave that definitely will increase the requirements in terms of capacity. On the other hand, due to the propagation and the coverage capabilities of the base stations at 26, 28 gigahertz, this will be mostly used in very high denser urban cases, so let me say hotspots, and probably integrated access and backhaul will be one of the solutions to be used. For integrated access and backhaul, if it is in band, so the spectrum is the same spectrum used for the 5G access for millimeter wave. So it will be regulated and licensed according to how the spectrum for access will be done. We know that there could be different approaches in different countries. There's a lot of discussions right now. So, but I wouldn't call it specifically backhaul spectrum. This will be radio access spectrum, and part of the spectrum resources will be used also for the integrated backhaul. We may have, for these very high dense urban, as also mentioned before by Nader, out of band backhaul may be done with the D-band. So D-band has very wide channels. In principle, we can go to capacities well above 25, 50 gigahertz for short hops in the order of some 100 meters. So D-band could be definitely a good case. I don't know if Nader or Paolo, you want to add something. Then I see other questions on what is the percentage of total backhaul needs can be met by micromillimeter wave in the future. 20 years is really a very long time to predict the future with the pace with the introduction of technology that is increasing very fast. What we can say is up to now we see still more than 70% of the base stations connected with backhaul. And we have seen forecasts by GSMA projecting in 2025 this percentage still to be higher than 65%. So we think that wireless backhaul will still remain very, very important for the deployment of 5G, also in the future, so in the long term, and especially for all those areas where the deployment of fiber can be very, very expensive, and as said before, to base stations that are not particularly profitable, so the return on investments for the operators can be really quite long. For sure, what we need, and this was also a good part of the presentation, is proper spectrum regulations and spectrum licensing in order to make micro millimeter wave still usable. So I don't know if Paolo, Nader, you want to comment which direction you would like to see spectrum licensing move. Yeah, this will be probably the last question because we are
running out of time. I fully agree with you, Renato. I mean, there's a lot of technology there, and there's a lot of advances ongoing. There is a lot of, experimenting with new technologies and so on. However, for this to become viable, we need some changes to the how regulation is done for these services. Certainly, as you highlighted in the presentation, this is a major change that need to allow operator to move forward and be able to utilize this new emerging technology that mentioned in this report and ongoing tremendously within this industry.
Yeah, agree. And also from Nokia perspective, we believe that these, in fact, should be really, these new technologies should not be penalized. And speaking about licenses for some bands, speaking about these new high millimeter wave bands, but not only, actually a kind of block license could be ideal, as it would unlock innovation, and also the coordination within a block would be much more easier and guaranteed by the operator and the vendor, as also highlighted by Renato in his presentation.
Okay, by closing, and I can answer also the last questions. So we are confident that micro-millimeter wave can meet the capacity required by 5G. The technologies that we also saw during the presentations goes by using higher parts of the spectrum, like the E-band, in which the large channels can support capacities of 10, 20 gigabits. The use of band and carrier aggregation by using E-band together with 15, 18, 20 gigahertz that make the best trade-off between capacity and availability, so we can cover even in areas like Indonesia, hopes of 4 or 5 kilometers with gigabits and with 5 nines on several hundred megabits. We can also use band aggregation in traditional microwave, for instance, 11 plus 32, so we can couple different bands, carrier aggregation, so to have a much more flexible way of using, and the introduction of interference mitigation, interference cancellation mechanisms that can permit to double, quadruple the capacity in a hub by using the same quantity of spectrum. So that's why it is very important for the administration to incentivize the use of new technologies, as said before by Paolo, without penalizing operators in investing in new technologies. So that's also as a conclusion, and thank you for attending this session.
Thank you.